Welcome back to another Theologic Bites episode. We are tackling the topics of various and sundry apparent contradictions of Scripture. This brings us to our next apparent contradiction in Scripture that is found within the resurrection accounts. Now, this wasn't found in any publications, but this was challenged to me by somebody who recently turned away from the faith. Very sad, but he had presented to me this as an apparent contradiction of Scripture.
I've heard this one before as well. Like I don't want to take away from what you're saying with this guy, but this is fairly common too.
Yeah. So here's the account. We have Mark chapter 16, verse 5. Listen closely. This is the account of the resurrection. Listen closely. Entering the tomb, they saw a young man sitting at the right, wearing a robe, and they were amazed. Now listen to Luke's parallel account in Luke 24:4. While they were perplexed about this, behold, two men suddenly stood near them in dazzling clothing. So the question is presented, the challenge was presented to me. Well, wait a minute. One says one man, and the other says two men, which is clearly and obviously an angelic being, which we don't have to get into that necessarily. But the question is, how many were there? Were there one or were there two? And so with that,
were there three? How many wise men were there? Sorry.
There you go.
One or two.
One or two or three or a whole crowd of them. But so this brings up the next important question that we need to ask for anybody who is seeking to interpret Scripture. The first one I brought up last time was, have you considered the context? Secondly, have you considered the categories being talked about? Thirdly, have you considered the author's style and subsequent meaning? And we're going to see that again in this. But fourthly, have you considered that these might be harmonious details brought forth? They might be harmonious, that they're not standing in opposition, but one is highlighting one detail over the other. And in fact, a very good resource I want to encourage you to look at is called One Perfect Life. It's a John MacArthur book, and what he does is he takes all of the accounts of the Gospels and even other sections of Scripture, and he puts them all together in paragraph form, and you can take a look at all of the details that each Gospel writer brings, so you can get a full picture of what happened. And so we have one young man or two young men. This goes back to the issue of the author's style. You preached through Mark, Sean.
I did.
Tell us about Mark's style.
Mark is fast.
Okay.
And as you were just saying a moment ago, Mark is also abrupt, where there is not a whole lot of good transitions, like a nice slow closing to a story and then a nice intro to another one. It's just fast-paced, abrupt from one event to another.
Keyword is
immediately.
Immediately, right? Elthos in the Greek. Immediately. It's everywhere in the Gospel
and so
of Mark.
If you're going to be going that fast, you don't have as much time per se for extensive detail, which may not be necessary for the point you're trying to make.
Right. And as a result of the speed, what happens is what he's interested in, what we demonstrate is he's interested in the action. Where is the place where things are happening? Now, by contrast, what's Luke's author style? All the
painfully detailed,
very detailed, right?
Luke, by his own confession. I mean, the opening 4 verses.
That's right.
It's not like something we're assuming. Luke says, "I'm taking time here to be very detailed."
Right. So Luke's plan is to be the one who researches and presents a full picture of all of the events that has taken place and everything that you would need to know as a physician, as an intelligent man. Very detailed in terms of information and research.
He produces the longest gospel
as a result. So
it may be 24 chapters?
24 chapters, yeah.
Yeah, maybe 24 chapters, but word count is longer than Matthew.
Yeah.
Matthew's shorter than Luke.
Yeah, and as you look at Mark, what's Mark? It's the shortest one, right? In fact, Mark begins his gospel very abruptly, and he ends his gospel very abruptly. He's a very abrupt guy. And so when Mark is putting together his information, he's going to where the action is. And so I would encourage you that if you pick up that One Perfect Life book, one of the things you find in it is it has a bit of information that there were indeed two angels that are there, one at the head and one at the feet, but one of them is doing the talking for both angels. And so what do we see? We don't see a contradiction. We see harmony as this one angel speaks on behalf of both of the two that are there and are present. And so rather than a contradiction, what we have, I believe, is actually a harmony.
An example of a contradiction, according to Wayne Grudem, would be that Luke says there were two men there, and Mark says there were not two men there.
Right.
That would, in logical terms, again, Wayne Grudem brings this point out, that would be a contradiction.
That's right.
What we have here are details that can be harmonized between Mark and Luke.
That is so good. That's good. It would I appreciate you bringing that up, because it would have been a contradiction if one says something that clearly negates the other.
Right.
But they both are joined together in their details and in their content together. So, questions to be asked. Have you considered that these things don't actually contradict, but they actually can and do harmonize together? And as a result of that, what you will find by God's grace, I trust, is that these things are harmonious. They work together, and that the Bible doesn't contradict here. It actually harmonizes. That's all I have by way of explanation here, and I hope you have a great rest of your day. Thank you for tuning in to this Theologic Bite.